Please, please, take a seat. Please, please. Take a seat as soon as possible, please. Okay, thank you very much. Well, we are going to resume the meeting, and after the panel dedicated to the initiative in the European Union about data spaces, we are going to move to the next one, that is focus on the interplay of the different regulation in Europe related with the data spaces, that the Digital Government Act, Data Act, Digital Market Act, Digital Service Act, European Health Data Space, Artificial Intelligence, and GDPR. So for that, we have a panel moderated by Anna Litra. Anna Litra is the Deputy DPO of the European Data Protection Board. Anna Litra is a legal officer and a Deputy Data Protection Officer of the European Data Protection Board, which she joined in May 2020. She holds an LLM in Law and Technology from Tilburg University, and she is a qualified lawyer in Greece. Before joining the EDPB, she worked in the field of data protection and cybersecurity at an international law firm, at a French consulting company. Anna is specialized in compliance tools and the GDPR, including binding corporate rules, code of conduct, certification schemes, and accreditation requirements for monitoring and certification bodies. In addition, she has been involved in financial matters, the EDPB binding decision under Article 65 GDPR, and social media-related matters. Anna has also worked on the EDPB documents concerning data strategy and digital package related legislation. So I am going to give the floor to her, and she's going to present you the rest of the speakers. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Good morning to everyone. Thank you for being here. So yes, as Joaquin explained, this panel covers a lot of acts and the interplay with data spaces. So we are going to cover AI Data Act, DGA, European Health Data Space, but not DSA and DMA. But we managed to have some quality discussions. Yeah, given the time constraints, I will just move forward and introduce the first panelist, which is who is Marit Hansen. So Marit, since 2015, has been the State Data Protection Commissioner for one of the few data protection authorities in Germany. So before she was appointed as a Data Protection Commissioner, she was a Deputy Commissioner for 7 years. And this year, she's the Chair of the Board for Data Protection Authorities in Germany. So since she obtained her diploma in computer sciences in 1995, she has been working on privacy and security aspects, and her main focus is on data protection by design and by default principles from both legal perspective and technical perspective. In addition, she has been a member of ENISA's ad hoc working group on data protection engineering. Last but not least, her contribution to education and privacy-enhancing technologies has been awarded an honorary doctorate from Karlstad University of Sweden. So I give the floor to Marit to cover GDPR and AI. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna. Thank you very much for the invitation, dear organizers. It's really good to come, to travel again, to be here with you all on so many and so important issues. And I will start with one sentence. What we have here with the new European acts, it's of course always one sentence: the GDPR remains unaffected. So everything is clear, right? Because we are used to work with the GDPR, and so we will continue to work with the GDPR, and the rest, of course, has to adapt. Obviously, it's not so easy because there are now many, or will be coming, multiple European acts on the same level. And of course, also more authorities, not necessarily the DPAs. They will always be responsible for whenever we have personal data, but we need some solutions that are workable and not only perhaps perfect in data protection as we require, but also workable for practical purposes. So we see, obviously, there will be processing of personal data, and there will be still GDPR. Think of Article 5, accountability, 24, or the rest of compliance, 25, data protection by design and by default, 32, security, 35, data protection impact assessment. And we see here, except for, or in addition to the legal the lawfulness of the processing, that we have an underlying concept of risk detection and risk mitigation, which is necessary that we think in those terms also for the interplay of the European acts. And of course, how to shape technology, how to shape organization, the full systems, so that we don't have additional risk, or that at least we can mitigate the risk. What kind of risk is meant? Not only security, or not the risk to innovation or so. It's the risk to the rights and freedoms of natural person. I'd like to show you one slide, because we all know about the data protection impact assessment. Perhaps we haven't internalized it perfectly well until now. But what we are heading to, and you see the head of the horse, to a fundamental rights impact assessment. We need something more, something broader. Although perhaps we haven't understood fully the concept of impact assessment, we need now a widening perspective. And you see what is happening here, that well, the artist draw perhaps the data protection authorities helped in drawing the back of the horse of impact assessment. But in the future, we are not totally sure whether we will also have a very nicely drawn head, or whether it stays that way. And obviously, this is not satisfying if we have fundamental rights impact assessment. It is already mentioned in some of the in the acts, for example, with Article 35 of the Digital Services Act, there are 5 categories that should be part of some risk assessment. Or with the negotiations right now in the Artificial Intelligence Act, there's also the fundamental rights impact assessment, at least for high-risk processing. A high-risk AI, whether it is high risk or not, obviously needs, again, we know that from the GDPR, some threshold analysis, some reasoning whether it's now high risk or not, and of course how to mitigate that. Now I call for having a professionalized fundamental rights impact assessment, FRIA, that we need best practices very soon. We cannot wait, but we really have to think in terms of risk and then broaden the perspective. I have a few more open questions here. How to be quicker in having the right solutions and not having to wait for the ECJ. ECJ is very good. It's the last instance, the final word. We all think it's a good endeavor, but we need to be quicker. And we need to have good solutions already before, perhaps 10 years later, we have the final solution, or perhaps one answer to one question from the ECJ. Also, how to orchestrate the different supervisory authorities. I'm now good in orchestrating the German supervisory authorities, and this year this is sometimes challenging, and the EDPB is good in orchestrating the European data protection authorities, but it will be a further challenge how to communicate, having the same terminology annotation. The European acts don't have the same terminology, which is another difficulty, and coming to the right solutions. And of course, I'd like to see more standardization. So let's think already in terms of some best practices, not the most difficult questions, but where we know where we can agree already. Because right now, it's really, if we are thinking of an orchestration, an orchestra, it's more a cacophonic impression than having the nice sounds. And this means perhaps not only that we don't like it, but really that it's not lawful, or that we, as individuals or as society, have difficulties in protecting people and society in their fundamental rights. So thank you very much. These were very high level aspects, but I think we need to boil down that as a first remark. Thank you.
Thank you, Marit, so much, and for respecting also the time. We will move on to the next contribution, and then at the end, hopefully, we'll have some time for follow-up questions. So the next speaker is Regina Becker. She's an LC fellow at the newly founded Luxembourg National Data Service, which will become the competent body under the DGA in Luxembourg. Previously, she had the role as a strategy coordinator and lead for LC in Luxembourg node of the bioinformatics research infrastructure Elixir. And she was involved in interpreting data protection legislation, as well as practical data protection concepts, such as data protection by design and by default for many years. She leads the national GDPR working group for public research and chairs also the LC working group for the governmental 1+million genome initiative. And this initiative aims to make genomes accompanying health data systematically available for cross-border secondary use in a harmonized fashion. So she will cover today EHDS and DGA and their interplay with data spaces. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Well, basically, perhaps I'm one of those which were mentioned this morning, bridging between having some knowledge of the law and having some knowledge also of data science and data management. Here, I'll be a bit the Cassandra, talking about all the difficulties you have when you want to create a data space for secondary use. And well, let's call it challenges. And indeed, my experience comes from creating a genome data space. It's the 1 Million Genome Initiative that intends, it's driven by the governments, and it wants to make genomic and health data available cross-border in Europe in a harmonized fashion, so a real, genomic data space. And, well, when trying to establish that, at first view, all looks good. I mean, we have now, or we're getting all these new enablers of regulations, the Data Governance Act, the European Health Data Space, the Data Act. But let's take a step back. We want to create a data space. What does it mean? Well, to really have a European data space means we need to have some kind of a harmonization. And now looking into the, harmonization, data should be harmonized, data governance should be harmonized. Otherwise, it doesn't work as a data space. So looking into the Data Governance Act, well, it basically defines entities, it defines a data catalog, everything is on the national level. There is a central European data catalog, but it's not clear how that references the national ones. Basically, everything is defined just for the national level to set up. So where do we get harmonization? We don't know. Well, but the hope rests on the European Health Data Space. European Health Data Space indeed pursues harmonization for cross-border primary healthcare. But when it comes to secondary use, there's a harmonized data governance, but there's no harmonized data because there's nothing about holding data for secondary use, improving data for secondary use. So we always only just tap into the primary use. And every time, again and again, there's not a space as such for secondary use of these data. We always need to extract from scratch. If these data get harmonized in a project, for example, these data will be thrown away afterwards because there's no legal basis to hold on to these data, only if the health data holder has an interest in them, but which hospital has interest in data optimized for secondary use, harmonized across Europe. It doesn't help them in healthcare. They do not even have a legal basis to hold on to it. Everything will be thrown away. So what do we do? Well, we create our own data space and do our own harmonization. Why not? I mean, basically, we cannot live in a Europe where every data space needs a regulation. That wouldn't work anyway. That doesn't scale. So let's do it ourselves. We want to harmonize the data. Data is personal data. If you harmonize them, you need to have a legal basis. What is your legal basis to harmonize data for secondary use in general? Well, you can do it as part of your mission in research, for example, for a specific research project. But you will not have a mission to harmonize data for some future use. That's not part of a mission of a research institution. So, well, what we can do, we can ask for consent. That is possible. It's not easy because for a data space we want to build on lots of data. That means we need to obtain lots of consents. Well, it's possible. But then comes the next. We want to have a harmonized data governance. Now, data governance is typically defined by national law. How can data be made available? Which data, under which conditions, who takes access decisions? All that is defined on the national level. So no harmonization whatsoever. So shall we try consent? Well, that's not feasible, because consent would mean that indeed each disclosure is for a new purpose. So each disclosure, we need to go back to the data subjects, ask for consent. It just doesn't work. So we end up with, we need EU legislation after all. And unfortunately, Data Governance Act also does not provide any legal basis whatsoever for sharing data, for harmonizing data, for anything. Nor does the Data Act. But, again, not all is lost. Luckily, there's the decision by the Council on the Digital Decade Policy Programme. And that decision provides us with a nice, very interesting tool, which is the so-called European Digital Infrastructure Consortium, also short called EDIC. This EDIC is a new legal entity that's created through a Commission implementing decision, so through a legislative act on the EU level, and it's supposed to support the digital agenda, so any purpose to be pursued on the digital agenda can be pursued through such an EDIC. And then, okay, we create a legal entity by law. When we create a legal entity, it must have a mission, a raison d'être, given through that law. But if we give a mission through the law, we have an Article 6.1e task in the public interest legal basis. And if we have a mission that requires, like in our case, the processing of health and genetic data, if this EDIC becomes the controller for the disclosure, well, then this law also must provide the permission to do this under Article 9.2 of the GDPR. So, in principle, that seems to be our way out. Now, we are in discussion with the Commission, who feels they don't have the mandate for this. They don't feel mandated to provide a legal basis. Well, maybe what the Commission feels is not so important, because after all, the Commission would still be mandated by the member states that create this EDIC, because an EDIC is always created by member states who define the statutes and who define as such the mission, the underlying legal basis, the safeguards. But then also a closer inspection of this EDIC tool puts the mission and the activities as non-essential elements of the statutes. And what does that mean? And does that get into our way to really provide the legal basis on a European level? Well, I must admit, this is where we currently stand. So we don't have a solution yet. We hope we can solve it through this. But this is just a glimpse of one of the problems we're running into when we want to create data spaces. And there's lots more I could talk about, but I don't want to overrun my time. Thank you.
Many thanks, Regina, for the interesting inputs. And now we move forward with our last panelist, Ricard Martinez. I hope the pronunciation is okay.
Very good.
Okay. Ricard is the director of the Chair for Privacy and Digital Transformation, a professor in the University of Valencia in the Department of Constitutional Law and Political Sciences and Administration. And he's here with us today to cover European Health Data Space, artificial intelligence, and Data Act interplay with the data spaces. So the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thanks. I will try to respect time, but I'm pretty sure that I will not do it. But in any case, let me summarize, because while I've been here in you, I changed my mind on how to will be my speech, because so many things have been shared by all of the previously speakers. In that sense, let me underline one additional issue that previously I have not covered in my presentation. We are not talking only here about data protection. We are talking about the future data-driven public policies. We are talking about the future data-driven welfare state. We're talking here about the future data-driven healthcare services. We are talking here about a future data-driven society. And let me underline that GDPR, that we are using like some kind of a low limitation in order to process data that this is not real, clearly expresses in the first paragraphs that data are addressed to promote human being, to promote common good. And this will be our approach. And our approach is not about how to forbid processing data, but about how to process data in a secure environment with guarantees. This is our main concern. And this must be feasible. This is not only about theory. Let me add to this issue that in constitutional law terms, that is my field, every principles and values of a constitution will balance with human rights, not only human rights itself. And in fact, paragraph 2 of Article 8 of European Convention of Human Rights clearly states that public interest, state interest, and other values really relevant for society will balance with privacy rights under the convention. Then we have to have a real whole approach to data protection from every perspective in order to provide solutions. This is the main approach of the different laws we are talking about. On the other hand, let me say that an ongoing procedure of a law is addressed to promote the best possible law. It's not only addressed to consider that all is okay in the first or second version. And we have to do our best in order to provide the better regulation as possible. Saying that, let me say that the main idea from me, from DGA, ACS, or Data Act, consists in empowering citizens, empowering data subjects. This is so difficult because it means that we are taking to face the fallacy of consent, providing real control for every data subject. And that's really difficult in terms of consent, especially because we have to understand, we have to be conscious that data subject in past, now I expect not in future, don't understand privacy policies, first. Second, we are facing service in practical regime monopoly. Third, there is an imbalance situation, particularly in cases like internet services, real network, or healthcare research. At the end of the day, they are providing a framework for decision-making and data portability, providing new rights of controls over secondary uses, and starting from Article 6 and 9, paragraph 2 of GDPR in order to identify conditions for processing. In practice, that this is my approach, let me say that here we are aligned because I'm working in EUCAIM, European Can Imagine, that is an additional edict that has been promoted from different states, including Spanish government. And we have to work on that. If we are considering data subject empowering, we have to be able to design dynamic consent wallets. We're talking not only about the traditional way to give consent or to control data. We have to ensure hybrid methods for collecting consent that manage cultural risk in the digital divide. We're talking not only about, we're talking about the whole population. Then this is not only about the use of a mobile application in order to provide consent. I think my mother is not capable to provide consent from a mobile phone. We have to assume that we have to employ video interfaces integrated in different environments. We have to design consent in different steps with multiple layers of transparency, and we have to bet on double-check validations. On the other hand, we have to manage reputational risks. This is not written in GDPR or in any other law, but reputational risk is really relevant. We have to provide society with trust. We have to inform clearly. We have to explain clearly what we are doing with data in order to provide this affordability. And then we need to learn about how to communicate with media what we are doing, because we are at risk in this area. And we have to manage the generation of digital evidence. On the other hand, we have to face with environment in which consent probably is not a good idea. And we have to recuperate the idea of common good. I completely agree that we have to grant and protect data protection right, but not only from an individualistic perspective. We have to consider the public interest. Finally, I'm worried regarding consent with a clear known phenomena. It's called the click fatigue. Our way to conceive consent in research as an explicit consent for any activity of research means in a cross-European environment that nobody will consent for 50 or 100 projects a month, clicking, clicking, and clicking. This is not useful. Finally, I think that this new legislation presents new data processing opportunities, but we are dealing with different national laws and soft law. We are facing that the only way for processing data at trans-European level requires anonymization. And it seems that anonymization is not the same in every country. At the end of the day, we bet on federated spaces processing in local spaces data under national laws. But I think this is going to be problematic because, first of all, we have to align position of European Data Protection Board on Opinion 5 from 2014 with Breyer case. That is not the same, it seems. On the other hand, we need to build a new culture around privacy-enhancing technologies. We are talking about differential privacy, multi-party computation, synthetic data. This is really relevant. And we have to consider that these technologies will be really useful and compatible with pseudonymization scenarios. Besides interoperability, we need to focus on security, traceability, and local availability. I'm not sure that all potential local nodes will be able to work on European federated data spaces. I'm worried about that. Finally, we have to provide legal governance at all steps. What we are doing now, we are providing legal on managing the data space, promoting clear rules and specific agreements on data sharing and terms and conditions, and adopting specific binding user policies on data processing, traceability, or non-re-identification clauses. We are providing in our projects additional organizational governance on ethics. Defining legal and ethics requirements include AI ethics, risk assessment, implementing procedures supported by data access committees, or collaborating with new stakeholders like the future health data access bodies. And finally, we have to define a high-quality supporting staff. We have to consider not only data protection officers, security officers, chief data officers, compliance experts, but data analysts. Because we have been talking about enrichment, validation, annotation, and this is so relevant. My final remark, I think we need a new approach from independent authorities, like that. Most of our future processing activities will be in the frontier of a sandbox. Now is the time for learning together to build the European dream of a digital transformation. Thanks.
Many thanks for this contribution. It was very informative. I would suggest to open the floor for questions the audience may have. Otherwise, I have some questions for the panelists. So if you have any question on these contributions, please take the floor, and the microphone is here, I think. Otherwise, I will proceed with mine. Anyone wants to break the ice?
Oh, I assume that we are in an open government activity where you could ask and interact with. In fact, I assume that all of you are better experts than me. Then, please.
Okay, I can break the ice, and then if more questions come up, you can take the floor. So first of all, I would have a question for Marit, because you mentioned one of the open questions is the risk of fragmented supervision due to all the new additional competencies that these legislative pieces add to the data protection supervisory authorities. And I wonder how is the situation in Germany, especially given the amount of the supervisory authorities that you have. As you explained to me, it's 17 plus the federal, and also I think you are very confident to reply this question since you're chairing the board this year. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think it's like well, the federal system is always something which adds complexity, but also has the advantage of some more resilience. And I think also following up on Ricard with everybody understands anonymity or anonymization differently, that's a problem. And it should not be a problem, and it should not be understood differently, because anonymization means that the data is outside the GDPR, and it has to be really clear whether it's outside or not. So this is a heavy or an urgent problem if it's really true that it's defined differently. But this means if only there would be one person to decide on that, let's say the EDPS saying now we are deciding for Europe. Usually there's a process to be elected and it may change after some time. I think it should not be a personal thing or of one authority, but we have to understand the problem, and obviously the different court decisions also had some different aspects of anonymization, which they are not offering the full picture right now. But 2014 is long ago. You know the Article 29 guidelines on that, and there will be new guidelines and very soon. So I hope for November. So this would be this year. Otherwise, early beginning of next year. Pseudonymization will come probably next year, a little bit later. But usually in the medical area, you don't want anonymization anyway. So probably anonymization does not help you so much because there's a lack of information probably of what you need later on. Pseudonymization may be more interesting for that. So we are discussing such things also on the German level, and meanwhile try to also have not the cacophonic impression there, but really deciding on what is going on with different expertises. So with my background on computer science, I'm the minority, but there are also people from parliament who worked there beforehand, and this is very nice to get the different perspectives together. But it should not be only a debating club. We need output, and we need, of course, the real solutions. Therefore, we want real questions to be answered, but not necessarily it's anonymization, because we answer those questions and then they say, oh, sorry, but we shouldn't have asked that because we mean something different. So meaning having the full range of what is necessary. On consent, I think we need some further development because of a world where we don't have interfaces, and right now not everybody has a smartphone, but why having a smartphone? Why having this kind of interface? We need the hybrid or multi-path ways, but also something where probably assistance, trustworthy assistance, can be of help. This is right now not directly addressed in the law. There have been some glimpses in the law, in the negotiation of e-privacy, for example, having a browser or software developers involved. Okay, so I think it has been, the discussion began, but perhaps years ago already, and we see really little progress. So probably it's good to put this, these questions and also some ideas on, let's say, broad consent, let's say dynamic consent, let's say getting the information of, yes, my blood tissue or my blood is being used for this very good society community purpose, having some ways back and forth for those who are interested, but not overwhelming those who are not. This is not about reducing the idea of consent having really a basis of, and it also has a risk attitude there, but having something which is very practical and probably gets more people even involved in how they could be part of the community, data-driven or data-enhanced, and getting some goods out of that. So this is a question on an answer on anonymization, consent, the way forward, and of course how to get them all together. And don't stop only at the data protection authorities. We need also the artificial intelligence people, the media people, the consumer protection people for specifics in finance and car security, also those, because data protection people cannot be experts on everything, and it wouldn't even be good to solve it without getting all these different, and sometimes there are tangents, perspectives on what we know already in the old world of security data protection or freedom data protection security towards the new world. Getting a fully sketched horse and not only half part. Thank you.
Thank you, Marit. Anyone from the audience even, yeah, I see someone.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you for organizing this session. It's been very, very useful, and I have lots of questions, but I was particularly interested in one of the comments regarding the high quality of supporting staff in this type of development, because it is true that, well, the ecosystem is currently built up in such a way that you have specialized staff or specialized resources in some key areas of research, or in the hospitals, or even at, let's say, in a more interconnected network. It will require additional resources in each hospital or in each research center to actually perform properly this type of tasks. How do you see the current, let's say, the current landscape, and where should we be investing in the future to develop this high quality personnel in these fields?
Okay, let me say that I'm not really optimistic from experience. I'm optimistic considering the future European health data space, human resources probably, but I'm collaborating with different kind of hospitals, but in other projects where European Union is promoting European hubs for computations addressed to small and medium enterprises. What I learned in this project and similar projects is that our small and medium companies are not prepared for fulfilling GDPR. All over Europe, I'm not talking about a specific country, all over Europe. They are not prepared to implement data protection impact assessment. Let me be clear, I read this data protection impact assessment based on the idea of saying, yes, 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 you could process data. No human risk, no human right risk analysis, no nothing. It's a boxes, a checklist that they mark in any case. And let me say that, of course, and for sure, they are not prepared for AI risk analysis. Then we have to assume that we need to promote expertise on that. And the intermediation services, the future intermediation services, health data access bodies, and future European spaces must consider offering this kind of services to the community at this level. In case of hospitals, it depends on. If you are talking about the reference hospitals here in Spain, those who has an institution like a foundation related with Carlos III Institute, they are more or less prepared. I don't know what is happening in a little hospital with no resources. Then I think we have to consider really seriously the conditions of the staff. And not only I'm talking about the experts, I'm talking about the whole staff. In so many countries and in so many administrations, there are thousands and thousands of people, of civil servants, that have never been trained on data protection or AI risks. I'm worried about that. We have to bet on this.
Thank you, Ricard, and thank you for the question. If there is no other question, I will move forward with my questions, but if yes, yeah, I see someone at the back.
Hi, good morning. Javier Huerta from Calen International. My question was rather about the relationship between the GDPR and the GDPR principles with other data-related initiatives like the Data Act. Why? Because I keep on reading and several opinions, especially from scholars and the academia, talking a lot about the tension or in some cases conflict between key principles in the GDPR, like data minimization, with the purposes of the Data Act, for example, which is about promoting more and more data sharing in different contexts for B2B, G2B, etc. So I would like to just to listen to your views, when it comes to this tension between the data minimization principles and the purposes of the Data Act, for example.
Let me say that, and this is a recommendation for academia. Sometimes it is really convenient to know how people is processing data in reality, not only in our chairs. And on the other hand, it's really relevant to understand and to apply what we learned in our first course of law, from Savigny, 19th century, to today. It means that we have to integrate the legal framework. On this side, I think that that should be some kinds of problems regarding definitions, but what I understood is Data Act is empowering people, conferring additional tools for control data. Then we have to understand that data rights under GDPR remain, but in addition, new laws are providing us new capabilities in order to control our data. This is the same case in the primary uses of European health data space. This is not only about data protection. They are additional rights conferred to data subject in order to control their data. This is the only approach I could conceive, to integrate the laws. On the other hand, if we are, I don't know, if we see the evolution principle, I think that, okay, GDPR is a really good tool, but now we are in 2023. And in 5 years or in 10 years, we will need additions and a better improve of the regulations. And I think this is the case. We are promoting a digital data code all over Europe. Remember that we're not talking about these laws. We're talking about the regulation of non-personal data processing that relates with personal data and non-personal data. We're talking about Open Data Directive. We are open about a real complex whole environment on how to process data in the European Union.
Many thanks, Ricard, and for the question. Is there any other question? We still have like 5 minutes more or less, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, I don't see anyone. So I'm wondering, because you all mentioned like the legal basis, Regina started mentioning it. You, Ricard, built it up like on the dynamic consent. Currently, for European health data space, if I'm not mistaken, it's an opt-out provided. And you also mentioned the concept of dynamic consent. I'm just wondering, how all these the different conditions, which are very strict according to the GDPR, like informative consent in the context of medical care, can take, and granular also, without leading to consent fatigue in the offline world for the patient. So I'm just curious to see what you have in mind in terms of more practical examples, if you have any, on how to obtain this consent validly and to have a valid legal ground.
Well, we've looked a lot into consent, and you need to be very careful because legislation is full of consent, but not every consent in legislation, or even what we used to from research ethics consent, is the consent meant under GDPR, because the GDPR says the consent has to be specific and informed, and there is no broad consent under the GDPR. And there's lots of countries that have implemented a broad consent, but that is an informed consent, typically under research ethics, for example, that comes on top of a law that regulates how actually data are being used, in particular health data are being processed. And because in principle, every single research project is an own purpose. And okay, we have recital 33. Recital 33 says, well, it is possible to consent to areas of research where it's impossible at the time of collection to be, fully understand the purpose. But it doesn't mean we don't know at all. It's just we only know the first steps. So that doesn't apply to secondary use, for example, because that comes much later, and there's no reason where we could say, well, it's impossible to obtain this kind of consent. So that's why we think the consent is actually not a good legal basis for data spaces, which was also voiced by the EDPS, by the EDPB. And it also makes sense. I mean, if we have a systematic reuse of personal data, then maybe that should not be left to researchers who think they may understand what's a good data governance, not to, indeed, the poor data subjects who do not really understand what's going to happen. They should agree, so it should be voluntary, as it was said before, but it doesn't have to be the legal basis. Rather, and I feel the GDPR, actually the consent wasn't meant for research. If you look into the original proposal, entire research was covered under public interest, and that was to be regulated, how you achieve this kind of public interest. And that's what I also like in this. I mean, it should be based on a legislation which is a necessary and proportionate measure in a democratic society. And then it works out. If you combine the voluntariness together with this kind of necessity and proportionality, but the interest of society, then it works out. Maybe what concerns me a bit, if you look into, it was mentioned this morning, the EDPS referred to the opinions written by the EDPB and the EDPS on these recent regulations. And I think virtually every one of them mentions that they do not see the necessity and proportionality achieved. And I think that may be the problem, that the legislator is falling prey to the same temptation as any data holder or prospective data user. They would like to process, as much data as possible, not thinking about minimization, not thinking about all kinds of, they just would like to. And there it's important to have events like this one today. We need to find this balance, and we need to see, because it is possible, we can balance both, but it is an effort, and it's data protection by design, as it was mentioned, and that's what I feel should strive for and find with this.
Okay, I think we have to finish now, because we are running late. No, we are good. Yes.
We have more to say, but it's
Yeah. Okay, so finish.
Thank you.
Ricard will...
Yes, we are finished.
We have finished.
1 minute, Ricard, okay. You want to say something?
No, I try to share with the audience that we have to consider consent from a practical perspective. In past, we have been researching with a few amount of people. Now, in prospective and retrospective studies and longitudinal studies, we are processing data, only data, from 1,000 and thousands of people. Then we have to find a new way in order to promote consent or opting out. Starting from the healthcare system, first impact with patient, informing about the research activities, and on the other hand, trying to find ways to inform about the main areas of research and the possibilities to collaborate in that, and of course, giving a feedback about the use of data in concrete on specific research activities. But consent for any research activity in a cross-border environment, this will be impossible.
Okay. Well, thank you. Well, after this panel dedicated to the interplay between the European regulation, and we have also seen in the previous panel what is happening at the European level with the initiative. Now we are going to land to the scenario in the national, what is happening in the national level. This is the topic for the next panel, titled Data Spaces at a National Level Through Europe. Please, Alberto Palomo. Alberto Palomo will be the moderator of this panel. Sí, sí, rápido. Wow. Let me introduce you Alberto Palomo, that will be the moderator of this panel. Alberto obtained his PhD in mathematical physics prior to working at Huawei lab in Toronto, where he developed numerical simulation for neural networks. He then spent the following 5 years leading the technical development of data science application for a large US electric utility company. 2 years ago, Alberto Palomo was appointed Chief Data Officer for the government of Spain. The Spanish National Data Office has prescribed an architectural and governance model for the deployment of a country-level horizontal data infrastructure. He is also currently the chair of the Governmental Advisory Board of GaiaX, which serves to align the European public data policy agendas with the Union's industrial activity. So, Alberto, the floor is yours, and you can introduce your speakers. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Okay, there we go. Well, thank you, Joaquin, and thank you to the la Agencia Española de Protección de Datos and all the folks joining us as well, because when I got the phone call from Luis to organizing this panel, we thought it was quite appropriate. You know, us from the Spanish National Data Office, and I'll tell you a little bit more in a minute, we really focus on sort of generating ways to make more sense of data and really break the silos that naturally occur in informational systems. But we found very quickly that it was way more than a technological aspect. In fact, technology is probably the easiest thing to solve. And so there's a lot of governance and you know, privacy aspects that need to be taken into account, and we can't claim to be experts on that. So much to the point of previous speakers, I think that there's a natural scenario for finding common grounds and consensus among people from different perspectives. But without further ado, I do want to introduce this panel, and thank you all of you for joining. Ima comes from the Joint Research Center, so she actually flew from Italy. She's a policy leader, and so her name is Emma Farrell, and she's a policy leader and entrepreneur. She's actually worked on the development of Ireland's, she's Irish, as you can tell by the name, Ireland's national strategy for artificial intelligence. And she has areas of expertise in human rights, in innovation, in digital economy, and in connected societies. And she's currently a scientific expert around the topic of data spaces and the digital economy unit at the Joint Research Center of the European Commission, which will explain a little bit what it is for those of you that are not aware. Rocío, in the middle. She's the director for the within the Spanish Ministry of Transport. She leads the Transport Technology and Studies division, and she has a lot of experience in the field of transport and sustainable mobility, and experience in project management, in consulting, and in research and innovation. And Maite, she's the Deputy Director General for Innovation and Digitalization at the Spanish Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries, and Food, I believe. And she's, her unit is responsible for promoting sort of innovation in agro and in forestry. And she's been tasked with developing the digitalization strategy of these sectors. And you will notice that our panel today is a little bit different than anything that's been shown before, because we have a bit more of a focus into IT and into actual practical projects. And I think that speaks volumes to the fact that, you know, and I think Ricard mentioned it right before closing, the need to bring practicality to this, because I think a lot of the privacy aspects will probably come clear once you actually start building things. So I like that message that he had. Before I give the floor to Emma, let me tell you a little bit about what the GRC, the Joint Research Center of the European Commission is, and I'm sure she will explain in a little bit more detail. So it's essentially, it's a Directorate General, even though it has a different acronym. The Joint Research Center is meant to be, it's basically a body of knowledge and consulting to the actual Commission as far as scientific evidence-based advice. And so the Director General supports the Commission with the Commission priorities and the whole policy cycle that the Commission is involved. They're also very heavily involved in the Horizon program, so the research program. And that's because the Commissioner in charge of the GRC is, well, right now it's Ivanova, it's Ileana Ivanova. So it's the Commissioner for Innovation, Research, Youth, and Research and Culture. So that's the background. And with that, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you for that very kind introduction, and also for the invitation to be here today. It's really a pleasure to see such a strong emphasis on the governance aspects of data spaces, which I don't think have received enough attention to date. So Alberto has already told you a little bit about the Joint Research Centre of the European Commission. We are the Science and Knowledge Centre of the European Commission. We provide independent evidence and advice, including in the area of data. And the unit that I work in deals very much with data. We're the Digital Economy Unit. The JRC broadly is both a provider and a consumer of the type of data that will be shared in data spaces. And we have a long multi-year experience of both working with data and also supporting data and digital related policies of the European Commission. And most recently, that has involved a lot of work helping to inform both the putting together of the policies and also the implementation for the Data Governance Act, the Data Act, the Digital Markets Act, the AI Act, and all the other regulations that we've been speaking about today. We also have our own important data sets. We have over 3,000 data sets within the JRC data catalog. We have a big data infrastructure, which is for our researchers to use. So that's hardware, software, data, and development environments for data-related issues. And we coordinate member state working groups relating to data. So for example, with the INSPIRE directive on public sector data. And we play a prominent role in standardization initiatives related to data. So harnessing all of that experience and the work that we've done in relation to data sharing and the publications that we have in this area, so we have over 500 publications relating to data sharing, we felt that it would be useful to try to package some of this information together as a resource that could be used for policymakers in particular as they go about conceptualizing or setting up and actually implementing common European data spaces. So here on the slides, I don't know if you have access to the slides.
I don't know if somebody from the organizing committee can help us to load up the deck. Otherwise, it's going to be hard to follow because we have a lot of figures.
In the meantime, I can continue speaking. So a number of the more relevant JRC reports recently that we've published on topics relating to data spaces. So there's one here, which is our scientific insights into data sharing and utilization at scale. So this one specifically deals with European data spaces. And about 2 weeks ago, we published a report on mapping the landscape of data intermediaries, which also mentions the important role that data intermediaries will play in European data spaces. And these are regulated under the Data Governance Act. We also have quite a number of publications on citizen-generated data, and also looking at how the Inspire directive can contribute to the European Green Deal data space. And also very recently, we published a report on privacy-enhancing technologies, which of course would be useful to many of the people in the room here today. Other things that we're doing relating to data spaces, so apart from the report and the knowledge base, which I'll speak more about in a moment, we are supporting the European Commission working on the Green Deal data space. We're looking at how new sources of data, in particular citizen-generated data, and data that is collected by data altruism organizations, also regulated under the Data Governance Act, how these can be used within data spaces. We engage in experimentation and testing of technical building blocks. So again, with the Green Deal data space, we are testing Gaia-X building blocks for that particular implementation. And our research across the unit, we have a mixture of data scientists, geospatial experts, people with a more technical profile, but also people with legal governance expertise and economists, because we really believe that data spaces are an opportunity to bring together, to have a more inclusive and potentially citizen empowering approach to sharing data. And I think that's particularly relevant for data spaces at the national level, which is the topic of this panel, because data spaces should really be bringing benefits to citizens at the local level and being used to help improve services for them. So then maybe just quickly to give you a summary of the knowledge base that we have. So it's basically this report, which you can download and have a look at. But we also have a database, which I can share the link with people afterwards. Unfortunately, we can't see it here. But the database, we tried to distill requirements for data spaces, both technical and governance related requirements from relevant EU policy documents. And within the report, there's a table of requirements. I'll just show you what it looks like here because we don't have the slides. But in that, we subdivide those into functional and non-functional requirements. So the functional requirements being what a data space needs to provide in order to meet the expectations and the functionality desired by the stakeholders, and then the non-functional requirements. So how does it actually operate? How do they operate in doing that? What are the quality attributes?
Yeah, and if you allow me, Ima, so actually the work that they've done, we've been a big consumers of that in the National Data Office, because our job is not really to deploy the projects, but to sort of generate contour conditions for people to be able to work on that. And I think that's, we were very eager when we actually read that report. I mean, it's quite extensive, but we thought they really hit the nail on the head with understanding what it is about data spaces, because a lot of people talk about it, but there's not really a common definition, and so we've been working towards that. With that, I think, and going into perhaps more industrial or practical aspects, I think Rocío wanted to share with us sort of the Ministry of Transport strategic data priorities, and also different projects that they've been working on. Thank you. Thanks for that. If we can, I don't know what slide number it would be. There you go. So this is all the work that Emer was trying to show us. They've done quite a lot of work as far as policy and research, and as he was talking about that. And sorry, actually, I'm supposed to be talking now, but we're running a bit out of time. So let me just give you a rather quick context of what data spaces are all about, and unfortunately I'm not able to see it, so it's a bit hard for me. It was said before that we live in the era of data, and so one of the powers of data is the scalability, because it's a non-rival resource. So much like the discussion that we've been having for the whole morning, there is a lot of value in using data widely, but like I said, it's in silos, and that's why the European data strategy has sort of strived to build this idea of the single data market, which is sort of a specification of the digital single market, which obviously has been heavily pushed on. I have a couple of definitions of data spaces, because a lot of times people talk about it and they mean different things. In the European data strategy, a data space is really a development framework. And this is important because a lot of people come to us and say, well, you know, you've got a platform. There's no platform. It's a conceptual framework. And ideally, that would allow you to build a complete and holistic data ecosystem, right? And so how do you do that? Well, you have to provide regulatory, technical organizations, and a governance structure to facilitate the interchange of data. And this interchange of data typically will be done peer-to-peer. So you really model the general conditions, and that's why I was talking about the contour characteristics. And you really need to make data sharing tangible, you know, based on peer-to-peer interactions and this idea of market enablement. Joaquin said it at the introduction that I'm currently chairing as well the governmental advisory board to Gaia-X. No sé cómo se baja esto. Vale. And a lot of it has been discussed about what Gaia-X and what Gaia-X is not. But really the idea is it's not a platform per se, but again, it's also a framework, in this case a technological framework and a governance framework where you are able to build federated digital ecosystems by way of rules. In a nutshell, it's really about digitizing industrial value chains, and you do it in a consistent manner. And because you do it in a consistent manner, you're essentially building interconnection between different IT infrastructures and organizational boundaries. And that's why it fits very well into the data space perspective, because you're not building a single monolithic IT infrastructure, but you're building a governance structure and an organizational relationship model. And so what we do from the governmental advisory board is basically try to create synergies, you know, and break modes between the public strategies, digital public strategies, like the one Rocío and Maite will tell us, but also the public policing. Without going into much detail, there's quite a few lighthouse projects that are pushing this Gaia-X concept in agriculture, in vehicle manufacturing, in smart cities, mobility, and there's been quite a lot of activity in the data spaces movement. This is a radar that the International Data Spaces Association keeps. This is just a tool to map data spaces, and there's very different amounts of maturity. The idea of having this common language that Gaia-X provides is to be able to not have those as single points, but actually be able to interrelate those different initiatives taking place. And with that, I'll pass on the floor to Rocío, who will tell us a little bit more about, you know, transport and transportation data spaces.
Thank you very much, Alberto, for the invitation to this panel. Thank you. Okay, I would like to talk about the role of the Ministry of Transport, Mobility and the Urban Agenda regarding data and data sharing. And I would like to refer to our mobility strategy, our strategy about safe and secure, sustainable and connected mobility 2030. This strategy was approved by Council of Ministers in December 2021. And it includes a total of 8 pillars and up to 150 different measures. And there are 2 pillars that are fundamental regarding data, data platforms, and data sharing, which are Pillar 5, smart mobility, regarding mobility or transport of a person, and Pillar 6, smart intermodal logistic chains. And there are 3 measures. There are 511, 513, and 643 that refer to promote the publication of open data and the development of mobility applications. And there are several projects that are linked to this measure. Also, there's another measure about analysis of mobility flows at national level and development of national transportation models. And there are also 2 other applications included in this measure. And the measure 643, design and implementation of the technological platform Simple. I would like to talk about a project that we started in 2013, long ago, and it was like the first project being totally digital at the Ministry of Transport. That it was the Observatory of Transport and Logistics in Spain, and this project has been growing since 2013, and now it's a reference tool for transport and logistics in Spain, and it is used not only by administrations but also by public companies in the process of decision making, and it includes a large amount of data and analysis about transport and logistics. But if we talk about other initiatives and projects that we've carried out in the last years, there is the National Access Point on Multimodal Transport Services. This National Access Point derives from the ITS directive, and which is important is that it includes the available digital data of transport offered in all Spain. And this portal is official, and it's open to the public since June 2021. And it's a portal that gathers information and data from either public companies, but also private companies. That data is given to the Ministry of Transport, Mobility and the Urban Agenda, and then it's published again to be used mainly by app developers, but not only. So these app developers can develop apps mobility apps to be used by citizens. Currently, there are over 100 data sets available, and if you take a look at the map on the screen, you can see the stops of the transport system in Spain. There are about 121,000.
I think in the interest of time, and since I just got a note that we're running a little bit late, maybe we can go back to that a little bit after the first part. But I want to give the floor to Maite for us to hear some of the Ministry of Agriculture projects.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry, Rocío. we have to be fast. Well, let me skip a few slides about transport. This doesn't seem to be working. Yes, sorry. Well, I have to be very brief. First of all, I wanted to give you some information of the general context where our sector is made of SMEs and individual undertakings, that really there's a blend and it's a blurry limit where your farm starts, where your house starts, and some sensitive data when it has to do with price formation, for example, or where you are, where your tractor is. And you have to keep in your head that 20% of agricultural income comes from a common agricultural policy, and that recipients are severely monitored by our policy. So that is going to be something that will come later, no? And this is an extremely asymmetric and complex food chain where ag-tech companies, seed companies, fertilizers companies, food retailers are the big corporates, and sometimes producers, primary producers and the industry are the weakest point of the chain. Taking that in our heads, in spite of the situation, the uptake of the digitalization is increasing. The ministry has an observatory of digitalization of the agri-food sector. In July, we explained some of our products. We did a survey on over 3,500 surveys for primary producers and industry, so we have a lot of data, and we are really realizing what is going on. But as I said, there's too much emphasis on control and monitoring purposes, which I think is the secondary intention of knowing, of gathering data. It's not the interested party, it's not research, it's something else. And in this sector, because of the asymmetries in the value chain, there's been a growing interest, and there was a code of conduct on agricultural data sharing by contractual agreement in the year 2018. We are really opening huge data sets, both in the ministry and Eurostat, whether they have to do with soils, with livestock, with productions, with prices, regarding the war on Ukraine and everything. And we are really good at e-government when it comes to what I say is like the income tax statement of the individuals that apply for the common agricultural policy. There's a widespread lack of knowledge about what a data space is, and we're lucky to have a project, a coordination and support action from our Horizon Europe having to do with agri-data spaces, where University of Lerida is taking part. So we are really in contact with them and learning along the way. We have unstructured data, structured data, real-time data coming from Internet of Things. We have data that is relevant for the price formation, data that is relevant for the environment, data that is relevant for our health, not to forget that COVID was a zoonotic event. There was an illness from an animal in a food market going to a human, no? So we really have to interconnect with the health data space and Earth observation data space. The Green Deal and their targets are really on the shoulders of our farmers. And that's what they perceive, that data space is about monitoring them in a scrutiny that they can understand, and not to make them get the most of their businesses and use the data for decision making and so on. When it comes to the pesticides and the fertilizers, I think in Spain we are very knowledgeable of this. We want to know what the farmers are doing with our e-government policy. And when it comes to antibiotics, for example, we want to reduce antibiotics in the livestock farming so that it has a better impact for our health. And the ministry is pioneering a system is pioneering a system that I mentioned is the application from the Common Agricultural Policy online completely, where it has the regions are the ones getting the information, but the central administration is providing information on the parcels, the cadastral information, and the agriculture will have, the farmer will have to send the data to the region, And there will be lots of databases interoperable when it comes to parcels and to plots and to geographic information systems. And that idea that is going to be little by little implemented has developed one of the best, oops, this is not my slide, one of the best of our user cases of data sharing, that is the cooperatives of data, agri-food, the Spanish cooperatives, because they compulsory have to fill in the income tax declaration for common agricultural policy recipients, are gathering huge amounts of data in a very clever and federated way. Yeah. But I don't know if, Alberto, you want to go in detail into the user cases and initiatives like this?
Well, we're running a bit out of time, but I think what we wanted to highlight, obviously, is there's a lot of activity in the field, both in agriculture, in transport, and obviously in health, that was discussed before. And to us, and the most difficult part of this is really how to make it coherent and have some sort of cross-governance that doesn't end up building, as the French say, like little cathedrals. And so some of the work that we've been pushing, let me just give you, this is from a report from Sitra, the Finnish Innovation Fund. It's not public yet. We have worked on it. They've taken over. So this was sort of a mind model of the interrelation of different entities working in data spaces, in this case in Finland and in Spain. As you can already see with the European Commission, the Parliament, EDIBS, regulatory bodies, it's quite complex. It's actually very complex. There's a lot of, and so we actually define 4 different levels of governance and how they need to map together. You'll see at the bottom the data space initiatives. Really, this is where things happen. This is where you actually decide how to share rules. And Maite mentioned this idea of data sharing asymmetries, and this is very critical. We've actually also talking to the people in charge of competence law. So there's many different initiatives going on, but then you add another layer at the member state. It's how to really drive data sharing at the national level, and this is where organizations like the Spanish Data Protection Agency have a role to play, because it's overarching. This is also where we were from the Ministry of Economy and Data Transformation. But then there's another aspects coming from the top, and you see that on the slide. You have these European data laws. They've been passed, so it's probably the next Commission's job to make sure that people comply with them. Probably the place where we found most criticality is in that EU-level bodies, the coordination across agents and data spaces, and there you have the Commission's Director Generals to set up the strategy, but then you also have the Data Protection Board, the European one, you have ENISA, the Data Governance Act has called for a European Data Innovation Board, competence authorities, and there's a bunch of elements in execution and in support. In fact, the Commission just released the winners of the 150 million infrastructure building for data spaces last Friday, I believe. So obviously there's a lot of things going on at the moment, and we really are calling for a need for good coordination. So we drew that red line with, we don't know if it's in the form of a public-private partnership, an agency, some sort of investments, but there's a clear need for that. And in that sense, I want to go back to Emer, who I know has, in the report, which is available, she's came up with very simple how-to guides, which I think are useful in trying to address this complexity or navigate this complexity.
Thanks, Alberto. Just to compliment you on the collaboration with Citra for that report, which I also looked at before I came here. So looking at governance in data spaces. So first of all, what is governance generally, and what is governance within a data space? And that is very much linked to the definition of what a data space is. And as we heard earlier this morning, there may be different visions of what data spaces could be. But within the European Commission staff working document on data spaces, they really adopt a functional definition of what a data space is. So it should bring together relevant governance frameworks, so relevant data infrastructures and relevant governance frameworks. So there's really a strong emphasis on governance from the outset in data spaces. You can see there in the slides, if we go back one, that the Data Spaces Support Center also in its glossary and its blueprint, which was recently released, also describes this governance framework and describes governance as the creation, development, maintenance, and enforcement of a governance framework, and how governance is a set of principles, standards, policies, and practices that define how a data space is governed. This is a word cloud from a webinar that the DSSC did, showing the different aspects relating to governance, which can also include the social relationships. I'll skip through the next ones because this is really the legal and policy background, and we've already heard about that today. But it just shows you that there are a large number of regulations that are potentially relevant to data spaces. And on this slide, so there's a diagram within the report which tries to map out, similar to what Alberto showed you in the Citra report, what are the main elements that need to be taken into account. And this is important because at national level, member states, when setting up different data spaces, will need to take into account both the EU regulations, horizontal ones covering things like intellectual property, competition law, data protection, and others. But they'll also need to look at national regulations. They'll need to look at sectoral legislation. They'll need to look at sectoral data space related legislation, like the regulation for the health data space. And then there'll be individual data governance schemes for individual sectoral data spaces. And each of the sectoral data spaces, they're developing their own broader governance schemes. So going to the how-tos, we decided that it might be useful to think of what are some of the key questions or challenges that people think about or need to think about when setting up a data space. And we divided these into technical and organizational categories. Each of them, you can see the picture over on the right, they're just 2 pages, and they're really at a very basic level. So questions like, how can stakeholders benefit from synthetic data in a data space? How can they facilitate discovery of data in a data space using metadata, etc.? On the organizational side, how can governments access private sector data of public interest? How to foster a people-centered approach to data in a data space. So you can see the list of them there. I'm just going to show you one of them in the interest of time. They all follow the same format. So they start by outlining a scenario or a problem. So in this case, it's about a city that wants to digitize public services, and it's starting to collect more data about its residents. In this case, maybe they're collaborating with some private sector companies, and it's important that they ensure that people's voices are represented in the data governance, given that the data pertains to them. It's also important that they collect information on different groups, that they're transparent about the documentation of the data. This is just a summarized version of the how-to, but you'll see the more detailed recommendations in the how-to. So it proposes things like using data sheets for data sets to expose any bias that might be in the data, emphasizing digital literacy and skills, engaging with how to engage citizens. It gives some examples of cities that are doing that, such as Barcelona with its Decode project. It gives some references to citizen advocacy groups. It talks about how data intermediaries can be useful in this area. So there are a number of recommendations for additional resources at the end of the how-to. So we have, I think, 17 of those at the moment. We would like to hear from you if there are other questions that you think it would be useful to cover, and we're really keen to learn from real-world examples as well. But you can find more in the report.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Rocío, tell us a little bit about the future of mobility governance, how you plan on building these data spaces. You're already building them, but how to control them and keep them sustainable is the challenging aspect.
Okay, I told you about the mobility strategy before. We have another 2 important policies at the Ministry of Transport. The second one is the recovery plan, which includes many aids for digitalization of transport, but there's also a project law we worked on in the past legislature about sustainable mobility. It was the approval was interrupted due to the call for elections, but we hope that in the next legislature this this project law is considered again for final approval. Okay, and in this project law in sustainable mobility, it is included the creation of a national mobility system, and one of its pillars is an integrated mobility data space, which we call EDIM, and different projects already carried out at the Ministry of Transport will be a part of that EDIM, but also data from another administrations. We want to share that data between administrations in that EDIM, and other projects run by the Ministry of Transport are also Hermes, which is a node for the national transport system, and some data are available already, or also a high value data sets, such as the data from mobility coming from cell phones, which is also very, very important data, and also the platform Simple, which will be in operation pretty soon. And the objective of this EDIM is to guarantee the availability of information for better design of public policies. But the information of this EDIM, which will cover transport offer, transport demand, costs, transport investments, and inventory of infrastructures and transport services also, will be also open to public, to private organizations, considering, obviously, privacy, of course. It's thought to be modular, scalable, and distributed. And just a little reference to the EDIC on mobility, transport, and logistics that is not already established, but several countries, Spain is included, are working on the Institute and on the better definition of this new EDIC.
Thank you, Rocío. Yeah, for those of you, this is a very new instrument by the European Commission called European Digital Infrastructure Consortium. Some of you will be familiar with the ERIC, the Research Infrastructure Consortium. This is for the deployment aspect, so it's a little bit more mature as far as technology, and Rocío and her team have been involved in setting up this framework, this legal framework within the European boundary. Rocío talked about the use of data for public policy making. Obviously, that's a heavy incentive, but I know Maite also wanted to comment on the governance aspect of data of agricultural cooperatives, which really is quite representative, because a lot of these players taking place are typically not very digitalized, although you'd be surprised the amount of digitalization happening in the field in Spain. But as far as governing a very overarching and far-reaching set of stakeholders, it's very interesting, because obviously the agricultural sector is very different from the industrial, where we have much smaller and bigger players. Typically, the agricultural environment will be set up or will be driven by many different people with different interests. So governance plays a huge role there.
Well, in this case of data sharing, the trust for the farmers won't come via privacy by design. It comes by the fact that the members of the cooperative are the owners of the first-grade cooperative, and there are enough umbrella organizations like second-grade cooperatives, then the regional federation and cooperative, and then the national institution. So they've been handling, these umbrella organizations of cooperatives have been handling their personal data for ages, and they trust completely each other. And now they understand that sharing the data that has to do, how do you fertilize the soil, how do you use plant protection products, is in their own interest, and through a very trusted systems and organizations. So the reason why we believe this, that the space is going to work, is because it has a clear incentive for the farmers, reduce the money that you spend on fertilizers and plant production, pesticides and so on, and the fact that you trust the umbrella organizations you are in. And there's another very good example of business-to-business data spaces that has to do with when the umbrella organization is a breeders' association. And it's about artificial intelligence for artificial insemination in certain breeds. When you are part of a breeders' association, the incentive to gather big data of your farms, of your females and males, to know their fertility, to know their filiation, and to get a good herd is direct. And the fact that you are part of this umbrella organization is critical. So they are not so worried about the legal things or the technological aspects. I think data spaces are going to thrive. Micro data spaces for different sectors and subsectors or regions, interconnected, when they really add value to the private producers, to the industries, or to the farmers. And those are my reflections.
Thank you, Maite. Joaquin?
No, we have to finish.
Yes.
So.
All yours.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Alberto, and the rest of the speakers. I realize that those panels are very interesting, but the time goes by. Now we reach the time for lunch. So I have, first going for lunch, I have two messages. The first message is addressed to the general audience. So the lunch is ready, so you can go there. But the second message is addressed to the panelists and the moderators and the speakers. So before going for lunch, go to the next room, because we are going to have a family picture. And then everybody will join for lunch, and we can make networking on that. Thank you.